Thanks, everybody. I don't know why I was sitting in the back just watching the last presentation, and I kept going over it all in my head, how much this industry has changed. I started in the early 90s, and like fly-by-the-wire didn't exist. Crew scheduling is where I started. It was by paper and pen and a ruler. Load planning was done with a calculator and a very early Excel spreadsheet. And here we are, 30 years later, and we're talking about using advanced biometrics, which is not where it needs to be yet, but it's definitely coming. And the motivation behind that, which wasn't mentioned, is the fact that while most of us in this room are probably closer to my age, the next generation are going to demand it is this way. And that's a big part of why the industry also has to evolve quickly to satisfy the demands of our oncoming consumers. So I'm going to take a few minutes. I'm going to go through digitalization in operations. I'm going to touch on a few areas, not all necessarily linked, but I think is indicative of some of the opportunities that we see. I'll start with supply chain. I think we've already heard presentations on this today. Arguably one of the biggest issues that the industry is facing at the moment. Post-COVID, it's still lingering. In terms of some of the challenges that we're seeing. If you write one story out of this day here in Geneva, this should be one of them. So we did a survey earlier this year, just asked our airlines, where are the pain points, where are the opportunities, where can we put some more focus as an industry to try to help address the issue, recognizing that there's no short-term fix here. Spare part shortages and long lead times was number one. Long turnaround times was number two. Repair capacity is an issue, and sole source suppliers are an issue, especially on engines. And then parts reliability is always a factor, and is cited as top four issues in terms of where our maintenance challenges, or maintenance departments across the industry are facing greatest amount of challenges. So we believe digitalization can help. It is an area where the supply chain management, predictive analytics, blockchain, use of blockchain, tracking of for greater visibility, possibility at some point for the use of AI. But change has been a little elusive in terms of this part of our business. And it also is very dependent on the state of the existing manufacturer and where they are in terms of their technical foundations within their company. But there are a couple of areas we believe that we could start at right away. So technical record standards across the industry is a bit elusive. It doesn't necessarily exist. Each government has their own set of sort of standards or regulations that they expect the industry or airlines within it to follow. And we believe that more work is required here to develop sort of a roadmap in terms of how technical record standards could be best managed from a digital standpoint. And that work is starting in earnest. And then the other area is really around improving transparency, visibility of inventory, and supply chain. So when I wrote notes for this yesterday, I was thinking, think about it if you were today, because it's very common that you're looking to buy a new vehicle. And that manufacturer tells you that that vehicle will probably be available maybe in 2028, but there's no guarantees. How can anyone plan a network, plan a business around that sort of ambiguity or lack of clarity? So we believe that there's also kinds of opportunities in managing this better, providing greater visibility of the stock. It'll reduce shortages. It'll also reduce behavior, which has existed now. It was something most people in this room has probably heard of, just in time. Anyone that's been around supply chains has been talking about just in time forever. We're not just in time anymore. In fact, we've gone the complete opposite of that. And more mature carriers will actually start hoarding parts now to make sure that they protect their operation. That is the antithesis of where we need to be as an industry, and greater visibility as to why we believe that transparency is important. We do provide a product. It's a bit of a shameless plug on behalf of IATA, but it is a valuable one, which is why we put it in there. We do have one. There's many on the market. This one happens to be one of the bigger ones. It's called MRO Smart Hub, and it's meant to address some of these things. It's at this point not where it addresses all of them, but we believe that it has the potential to continue to add benefit to our industry. Currently on this platform, we have over 1,000 users and 450 companies that sit there to provide information to our members. So certainly some opportunity in terms of the maintenance front on the supply chain. Not necessarily completely related, although if you do damage an aircraft, it's definitely going to have a supply chain impact. And so, we're obviously focusing on aircraft damage, and there's a digital component for this as well. We put lots of shock and awe values in there and what this potentially could be by 2035, but the fact is it's costing us billions at the moment, and there's an opportunity to reduce those costs. The key areas where we see it, I don't think is anyone big surprise to anybody. Passenger stairs, belt loader, cargo loaders, and boarding bridges. Basically, anything that has to mate to that aircraft is in some way, shape, or form causing or has the potential to cause damage. So, what's the answer? Anyone have a new car in this room? Anyone drive a car in this room? If you drive that car today and you come within a foot of something, what happens? It makes noises. Most of our equipment on the ramp today does not have that technology. Why? It's expensive. Back in my airline days, the oldest piece of equipment we had that was in operation was 60 years old. So it is a very expensive proposition to replace all your GSE. But we have to. And the answer is what we refer to as enhanced GSE, but essentially is that. It's sensors, it's automatic shutoffs, it's data from that particular piece of equipment that'll tell you who's operating it, where is it, how fast is it moving, is it operating as per standard operating procedure, all those things that will make the ramp safer and also reduce ground damage. So what are we doing to try to, so we're trying to sort of keep track of the performance of the industry in this as they begin to embrace and onboard enhanced GSE. This year, we've got 66 applications from ground service providers, or 14 ground handling and the rest airlines in terms of looking for a certification. We've certified 26 that says they actually meet the criteria to say that you are operating with this type of equipment. Next year, we will see an exponential growth in that because we will add it to our requirements as part of our ISAGO audits, which will then see a number jump to 250 plus applicants in terms of being able to size where we are and where we need to go as an industry in terms of accepting this. One challenge, however, as the industry is now getting more like 60 to 70% ground handling service providers versus self-handling, the ground handler has to pay for it, while the airline receives the benefit. Now, this story is not new because we have the same debate in airports. Who invests in the biometric? Who gets the benefit? So we have to make sure that this is a balanced approach and that we recognize and have a strong business case for industry versus just looking at who pays for it and who benefits from it. If you're interested in more detail, I encourage you to go and I think this report or this presentation is provided after or during. Where you can go in and see as much detail about damage as you want. You'll probably be a little bit depressed at the end of it, but I can tell you it's well worth the read, and it gets down into a bunch of different breakdowns beyond the sort of high level that I just touched on. Baggage, our favorite operational topic, related to ground as well, but there, believe it or not, even that old doll has an opportunity to improve from a digital standpoint if we get at it. So, no surprise, 1 in 5 customers say that they've lost or been impacted by a bag in one way, shape, or form, which was come out of our latest global passenger survey. And if you haven't referenced that, I encourage you to, because it's one of the best voices of the customer that exists in the industry. How are they impacted? Mostly it's around delayed bags. Sometimes it's damaged bags, then it starts to get into a little lost bags. Fortunately, that's less pilfered bags, much less, and then another. We've gotten much better at this as an industry. When I first started running airports many, many years ago, our passengers arriving without baggage were well into the double digits in terms of bags per thousand. That's now into low single digits, but it's still a problem that needs to be addressed, and it's one of the number one dissatisfiers from a customer standpoint. So this is an interesting slide so we can sort of understand what the expectation of our customer is, which again comes from our global passenger survey. But over the majority, 52% believe that recovery of a bag should be within 24 hours. I can tell you that our stats aren't quite that. And then if you look at a large percentage of that, 32 feel that it should be within 12 hours. And I can tell you we're nowhere near that, especially on international flights. So there's again a growing need for us to do more here. One way, and this doesn't sound very sexy, but anyone that's worked in operations in the airline side of things will recognize that most of the messaging, if you think that PNRs and tickets that we saw earlier were antiquated, this is more antiquated. It is reliant 100% on Type B messaging, green screen technology that has a GUI front end on it, but ultimately it is very limited and very costly. And we believe through XML, eventually JSON, we have an opportunity to improve that. We will this year, and by the end of this year, we'll have run a couple of trials on airlines that have been using it from an airline to an airport and start exchanging what they say is XML messaging. The reason being that this will allow and unlock a huge opportunity for the industry in terms of being able to not only reduce costs, which is in the hundreds of millions annually, but also will allow for better messaging, pictures, just a better system in terms of how we be able to understand where things are and how we can recover them. So it's a big initiative that will grow as we see. And this time next year, I definitely will, if I'm still here, God willing, we'll provide you an update on where we are in terms of its acceptance and where we plan to go next. Another area which is really important is our tracking. Now, this is the number one issue for customers. It's also the number one issue when asked what's stopping you from connecting a bag, or would you connect a bag if you had more confidence in being able to track it. So we're looking at Resolution 753, which is something that the industry adopted a few years ago, just to take a pulse check, where are we? Good news is we're actually seeing some pretty big uptake. Certain parts of the world way ahead of others. North America is pretty solid. North Asia is in the high 80s in terms of its implementation. It's really simple. It's tracking bags at 4 points. Now, some airlines choose to do more, but it's really acceptance, it's unloading, it's transfer and arrival. And having those data points to be able to share within the company itself, but also with the customers. Just think about that, how easy it is if you have that information, to be able to isolate where did the bag go missing? Did it actually get on the airplane? Did it come off the airplane? Did it make its transfer, or did it actually go to the baggage belt? It's pretty simple stuff. And as you can see, we still got some work to do in terms of making sure that getting our industry where we hope to be. And the last area, and this is very, very much in line with what Yannick was talking earlier about modern airline retailing and one order. So you think about a bag tag today, I mean, never mind the environmental consequences of how many tags we're issuing in a run of a year, which probably could justify fixing it. If you have to reflight a bag, if you have an irregular operation, and that bag, and I've seen it, thousands, I've actually have been responsible for actually removing thousands of bags from an airport terminal and putting them in the hangar so that media couldn't take pictures of it when things really go bump in the night. So you got all these bags with all these bag tags, and every single one of them has to be manually manipulated, scanned, to be able to understand where that customer went and where do I send that bag. Just imagine how complicated that is. And in this world, with an electronic bag tag, which the standards are already available, you fix that in one swoop. All you need is an internet connection, and it'll reflight that bag for you. So we really are going to dig in on this. We're going to update the standards. We're going to, most importantly, work with governments, because that's the biggest, in some ways, the biggest hurdle in terms of its acceptance. I think if anyone in this room recognizes anything, that governments are reluctant to change, and so we need to be able to convince them otherwise. But it's a huge opportunity on the baggage front. And lastly, and this probably of no surprise, there's a huge, huge opportunity in terms of using operational data to improve safety and sustainability and efficiency. And we sit on tons of it. In fact, a lot of it was sitting on and nobody knew what to do with it. And we're trying to change that. So we have a global aviation data management program. We call it GATM. It has been a labor of love. It started out small. Luckily, been involved with the team since the beginning. And it's basically 4 components. But it also takes data from all kinds of sources. IOSA, which you may be familiar with, the world's global safety audit, which we manage. ISAGO, other programs are being ingested. We also get other types of data. The 4 key areas: flight data, FDX, incident data, IDX, maintenance cost data, MCX, and accident data, ADX. And within each one of those, we're at various stages of onboarding the industry in terms of its usage. FDX are about 25% of global flights. IDX, we have 293 airlines participating. MCX 40 plus, but we just renewed that. We're going to grow that. And based on the supply chain stuff that I mentioned earlier, this will grow pretty quickly. And then ADX obviously has been around for a while, but we digitized it to help be able to put out our accident data more regularly and be able to follow up when we don't receive the reports, which is something that we've talked about, and I'm sure Mark may have mentioned earlier. So these are the areas in the sandbox we're in. There is no database like it, and it is fast becoming the reference. So our goal for next year is to collect over 30, there's 35 million flights today. We've got 30 million flights in the FDX program and 9,000 aircraft that are speaking to us. And this is capturing parameters every second of every flight that's in it. So the amount of information available is immense, and the benefits from it are immense from an oversight perspective, but also from the operator's perspective as well. I won't get into this, rather technical. For the pilots in the room, happy to talk about it afterwards, but this is just a couple of use cases in terms of how we're using the data. So terrain collision avoidance systems are all over the place, obviously for good reason. We used it specifically in Latin America, based on a rise that we've seen of TCAS warnings, and using the data to be able to understand the reaction to these warnings, to be able to look at standard operating procedures to improve our reaction to them and avoid them as well. So that's one example. And then another example where we use it for predictive analysis. So using airports and aircraft data to try to help look at potential issues that may occur, and using it for predictive risk assessments in the future. And an efficiency game. So we used to go, and we still do actually, and we're not the only ones, go out and do fuel audits. I've done myself. We look at, the aircraft, the airline operator themselves. What's your engine cleaning program? What's the weight of your aircraft? How often do you weigh it? What do you have on board? The electronic flight bags and all these things. And you have, what's your program to manage it? That's it. But there was no benchmarking capability at all, zero. So what FuelIS, which is a new program we developed in 2024, gives airlines is basically an opportunity to compare themselves to everyone else. So if I'll use an example, if you're operating a 320 from Toronto to Vancouver, and some other carriers operating the same aircraft type, you can actually drill in to see what your performance is like versus your comparatives, and see if there's areas of flight that perhaps you're not doing such a great job on. Takeoff, landing, in flight, altitude, speed, all those things that can go a long way in terms of reducing or working on your number one cost within the industry, which is, or second, depending on the airline, but it's either fuel or people. And so this is a game changer in terms of being able to allow airlines with greater access to information in terms of how to manage fuel more efficiently. So that's it. I tried to be as brief as possible. Those are just a few areas. It could go on all day in terms of where data is changing us. We seem to learn things different every other day, and but it is a lot happening at once and a huge amount of opportunity. So that's it from my side.
Perfect. See if there's any questions. Yeah.
Yes, you mentioned 40% of the damage done to aircraft is by the machinery on the tarmac. What's the other 60%?
Well, could be anything. Could be catering. Could be towing. We see a lot of towing incidents. They're the ones that usually get the social media attention. So it's a range of issues, none of which sort of jump out, as in terms of it percentage-wise. So there's, it's a lot of it is some of it in the hangar itself as well, which would be kind of not categorized the same as if in operations. So it's a mixture.
Karen?
Thank you. Thanks, Nick. On the Fuel S program, I just want to confirm that the airlines that participate in that you don't get information that you can identify the airlines, correct? Yeah.
Everything is done on a factor of 3.
Right.
So that to avoid that problem, that's in almost everything we do.
Right. So can you just give me an idea of the extent of in terms of numbers of airlines that are participating in that, so that you can understand how important the benchmark is, and the regions. Are there airlines in certain regions participating?
We just launched it, so it's too early to tell. And I know that the consulting team manage it, and I know that they're in a large amount of discussions with. They will use the word a large number of airlines, but I can't give you specifics. I do know that I was part of the team that launched it at the AGM discussions around it, and there was a significant amount of interest. It's just embedding that into their costs but for sure there'll still be a lot of uptick on this.
Yeah.
Hi, Nick. With the enhanced ground support, do you see a difference in regional uptake? Are there certain regions that are a little bit more enthusiastic in moving towards the enhanced ground handling?
Well, I think, you tend to see Asia Pacific in certain locations, some of the obvious ones. North Asia is very ahead of the game in terms of adoption of new technology. I know there were some speculative questions around why Hong Kong, but anyone that's traveled in Asia will see pretty quickly that the adoption of biometrics and adoption of anything that's going to be more efficient is already there. But in general, no, there's not a significant, other than those areas, it really boils down to the airlines themselves and the budgets. I mean, I joked when I said we have GSE that was 60 years old back in one of my previous companies. But the fact is, if you were to replace it, it would cost you $1 billion. And so it takes time for this to get implemented. And there's nobody standing in the way. It is just a question of where it fits in the budget process.
Nick, about fuel efficiency monitoring on flights. It's obvious and clear that the companies can get figures and can monitor it. But what about crews? Can that be not an additional stress factor for crews if they don't meet the standards? Have you made any survey on that?
Well, I don't know, I've been around this place too long probably, but my first answer would, the buck stops with the captain, and they put as much fuel on an aircraft as they want. And just anecdotally, as an industry, pilots put on what they call granny fuel whenever they want, whenever they feel, and they're never questioned for it. And that's the way it should be. You know, if a pilot feels, but it's not about saying whether or not I'm going to have an extra 100 pounds, 200 pounds of fuel. It's just looking at, primarily would be looking at your flying profile. So, you know, some airlines use their dispatch systems for that, but it's only good enough for you. So that, you know, I like to fly at 38,000 feet, and I want to fly at 150 kilometers an hour. Some airlines may decide to take go at a lower altitude and a slower speed. So a longer stage length and burn less fuel. So really, it's more about that than it is about getting into individual flights and whether or not a pilot's making decisions on how much fuel is on board an aircraft.
Thank you, Nick.